My book, The Art and Making of Fantasy Miniatures, is available now. Check out the link in the description to find out more. This is a review of Tales from the Sea of Thieves, and I'm so glad they tried to do something like this for Sea of Thieves because I'm just obsessed with these immersive in-world type books. Unfortunately, while the concept, images, and presentation are superb, the text is a massive letdown. But let's start with the good stuff. So, like I said, visually and physically, this book is magnificent in its presentation and design. The feel of the cover, the rough matte paper with its aged and stained look that doesn't just repeat the same pattern every page. It's published by Titan, who also did similarly designed books for the Elder Scrolls, and one thing I criticized was how they kind of spoiled the design by printing a barcode on the back. Well, it looks like they've acknowledged that mistake because this one's completely unmarred, so well done, Titan. Then there's the wonderful imagery, which as far as I can tell are all concept artworks that have already been included in the Sea of Thieves art book, which I've reviewed previously. So if you have that book, don't be expecting to see anything new here, but I really didn't mind that. I feel like the way the pieces have been repurposed and presented here is really fresh and looks a lot better in this context. But while the book looks incredible, the text is another matter, which is very unfortunate as that's the main event. Now, the first thing I want to establish straight up, I have seen so many people referring to this as a lore book, which is completely misleading. It is not a lore book by any stretch of the imagination. The amount of actual lore in here could fit on the back of a postcard. What this book actually is basically an in-world journal. The first half is written by a wealthy scholarly young man on his journey to become a pirate captain and learn about the pirate world. But frankly, it's just very boring. And I'm not saying it's awful, just very uninspiring and lackluster, which is kind of inexcusable considering the rousing subject matter. It just feels like a light, humdrum description and dramatization of what you do in the game, which unfortunately is not much. Now, in a way, that's kind of the point of these sort of books, to capture something of this digital world and bring it into our own. And so I have to wonder if the game itself might be a little bit to blame. Now, I haven't played Sea of Thieves since shortly after launch, so if I say anything that doesn't reflect the current state of the game, you'll know why. But this is still fair since this book came out at that same time. And so if you don't know, at launch, Sea of Thieves was heavily criticized for a serious lack of things to do, and once you broke through the gorgeous, promising outer shell, you find it's really just made up of a hollow core. And that's the exact same problem this book has. However, to blame the game for the book's faults is a flimsy excuse, and I feel that the majority of the blame is due to dull, uninspired writing. A better author would have been able to overcome any limitations of the game world, to add to it, to give deeper background, or just make it feel more exciting and fire your inner swashbuckler and make you want to jump into the game. The art and design of this book do that, but the writing doesn't. So then halfway into the book, it switches narrators, and actually gets noticeably better. It's funnier, and there's a little more of an interesting story to it, still quite slow and tedious, but a lot more engaging. Until it completely shits the bed with the most anticlimactic non-ending imaginable. And I was left so disappointed to realize that any mystery, any larger story that was being built up was just tossed overboard, and I'd been strung along on a completely pointless tease of a journey. And so not only is the quote-unquote story not interesting or entertaining, but the book also doesn't do a good job of informing you about this world or representing it. Really, the only thing I think that was well done with the text was how it frequently worked in things you actually do in the game, but even then, that's just a novelty that doesn't offer any deeper insight or background to the world. Like at one point, the narrator wonders why the merfolk save and transport stranded pirates, and is that part of some ancient pact? Now that's an interesting question, but wouldn't it be more interesting if the book actually gave you an answer or background to that? In fact, based on the title, I thought this was going to be a book about sort of pirate myths and legends from the Sea of Thieves world. But any of that stuff hinted at in the game is barely explored here. Or as another example, the first narrator is actually a kind of notable NPC in the game, but there's absolutely no payoff. There are plenty of fun references for fans, but they just feel like pointless Easter eggs, like, hey, it's that thing from the game, so what? And look, I know, at least at the time, Sea of Thieves is more understated and mysterious with its lore, and that's one of the things I loved about it, how you'd come across little clues and references that you'd have to interpret and put together yourself to form a larger image of this world. But even in that sense, this isn't something the book is playing to in any sort of satisfying or creative way. And so overall, if I had my time again, I honestly wouldn't buy this book, and that represents an inexcusable and embarrassing failure on the part of the author, publisher, and developer, because in terms of the concept of this book, I feel like I'm the perfect audience. I'm obsessed with these sort of in-world books. I love the world of Sea of Thieves and even just the pirate theme in general. And yet, except for the fact that the idea is really fun and the book looks incredible, I'm just left very underwhelmed and disappointed. And so in deciding whether or not you may like the book, just ask yourself, why do you want it, and in what ways do you expect it to satisfy you? And then see how that compares to the comments I've made, and I think you'll have your answer. Because the text, you can basically cross that out. The images are brilliant, but already in the art book along with so much more. And so all that's left is the fact that it looks really cool, and there is certainly some degree of fun to be had just flipping through and looking at it, but is that worth the price? And you know, sometimes the novelty and whimsy of these sort of books alone is all they need in order to be appealing, but this book's just not doing enough for that to be the case. So honestly, the only person I could imagine who would want to own this book is if you are a big fan of the game and think you will be able to appreciate it just as a tangible memento of the game, in which case it'll probably be nice to have just as a piece of cool merch. If you're not familiar with the game, but you're intrigued by the book just because you're a fan of the pirate genre and you like the look of it, it's certainly possible for you to read this book without any prior knowledge, but I just don't know if it's worth it. There are a few concepts and references that will confuse you, and even as someone who's played the game, I found the writing to be pretty unclear and confusing at times anyway, with things very poorly explained. But on that note, if you are the sort of person who, like myself, enjoys these sort of immersive, interactive books, and you're a big fan of the pirate genre, there is a surprising number you may be interested in checking out. How good they actually are is up for debate, but I thought you might want to be aware of them nonetheless. First up, there are a couple of non-fiction books done in this style, such as Pirates by John Matthews and its sequel, Pirates Most Wanted, which I think is the same book as Pirates Rogues Gallery, published under a different title maybe. There's also another book called Pirate Soul. Then getting into a blend of fiction and non-fiction is the Extraordinary Piratology and the Piratology Handbook, which is part of the Ologies series, and while they are aimed at children, I just think they are unrivaled when it comes to these sort of books. There are also a number of kind of interesting but not really amazing Pirates of the Caribbean tie-ins, the best of which is probably The Secret Files or The Pirate Guidelines. And then lastly, we have Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Blackbeard the Lost Journal, which is very similar to Tales from the Sea of Thieves in terms of theme and concept. And while it also leaves much to be desired, I actually like it a lot better than the Sea of Thieves one, which on the surface should not be the case. Sea of Thieves has every advantage in terms of what I find appealing. It's fun, colourful, richer, has the huge advantage of being fantasy, and it came out 5 years after the Assassin's Creed book, so had the benefit of learning from its mistakes. And so it should have blown the much more dour and constrained Assassin's Creed book out of the water, but the fact that it doesn't really reflects very poorly on Tales from the Sea of Thieves. However, if you are interested in a deeper dive into the Assassin's Creed Blackbeard journal, keep an eye to the horizon, as I will be doing a review on it very soon.